David Richardson sat in his corner office on the 20th floor, staring at the reports spread across his mahogany desk. The numbers told a story he didn't want to believe. Customer complaints were up 30%. Employee turnover had reached an all-time high. And the anonymous reviews on job sites painted his company as a nightmare place to work. He'd built Retail Max from the ground up. Started with one small grocery store 15 years ago, and turned it into a chain of over 200 locations across the country. He knew every inch of those early stores. He'd mopped floors, stocked shelves, and worked the registers himself. But somewhere along the way, between board meetings and quarterly earnings calls, he'd lost touch with what actually happened on the ground floor. His VP of operations had given him the usual excuses: bad employees, entitled millennials, people who just didn't want to work anymore. But David wasn't buying it. Not entirely, anyway. He'd seen the same passion in those early employees that he had. Something had changed and he needed to figure out what. That's when the idea hit him. It was crazy, maybe even a little paranoid, but he couldn't shake it. What if he went undercover? Not as the CEO doing a press stunt, but as a real employee. No cameras, no announcement, just him working alongside his staff to see what they really experienced every day. 2 weeks later, David stood in front of his bathroom mirror, barely recognizing himself. His usual designer stubble was gone, replaced by a clean shave that made him look 10 years younger. He'd ditched his expensive glasses for a cheap pair from the drugstore. His tailored suits hung in the closet, replaced by khaki pants and a plain polo shirt that felt stiff and uncomfortable. His wife Rachel had laughed when he first told her the plan. Then she'd seen he was serious and spent the next hour trying to talk him out of it. What if someone recognized him? What if he got hurt? What if the whole thing backfired? But David was determined. He'd already arranged everything with his head of HR, sworn her to secrecy, and selected the store. A struggling location in suburban Cleveland that had the worst scores across the board. The store manager there, a woman named Patricia, who'd been with the company for 8 years, would be told that Mark Thompson was part of a new corporate training program. He'd rotate through different departments, learn the systems, and provide feedback. It was thin cover, but it would work. People saw what they expected to see, and nobody expected the CEO to show up wearing a trainee name tag. David arrived at the store at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for a few beat-up cars clustered near the employee entrance. His luxury sedan would have stood out like a sore thumb, so he'd borrowed his nephew's 10-year-old Honda. Even that felt too nice. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unflattering. The store smelled like cleaning chemicals and old produce. Patricia met him near the time clock, barely looking up from her clipboard as she shook his hand. She seemed tired, stressed, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You're the new guy from corporate, right?" she said, already walking toward the back. "Good, we're short-staffed today. Actually, we're short-staffed every day, but that's nothing new." The orientation lasted about 15 minutes. Patricia showed him how to clock in, handed him a vest with a name tag that read Mark Trainee, and gave him a quick tour of the stockroom. Then she pointed him toward a mountain of boxes that needed to be unpacked and shelved. "Think you can handle this?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. "The pricing gun is over there. Instructions are on the wall, but honestly, the system's pretty straightforward. Just scan price and stock. Try to get through as much as you can before the morning rush." And just like that, she was gone. David stared at the boxes, then at the pricing gun, then back at the boxes. This was going to be harder than he thought. In his mental image of going undercover, he'd somehow skipped over the part where he actually had to do physical labor, real exhausting, back-breaking work. He picked up the pricing gun and tried to scan a can of soup. Nothing happened. He pressed the trigger again. Still nothing. After 5 minutes of fumbling, he realized the battery was nearly dead. He found the charging station, but there was only one other gun there, and its screen was cracked so badly he could barely read the numbers. This was the equipment his company provided? He made a mental note. Then another, and another. By the time he'd gotten through his first box, he had a whole list of problems forming in his head. The morning shift was brutal. His back ached from bending and lifting. His fingers were sore from tearing open cardboard. And he'd only gotten through a fraction of what Patricia clearly expected him to finish. Around him, other employees moved with practiced efficiency, but even they looked exhausted. A young guy working the dairy section caught David struggling with a particularly heavy box and came over to help. "First day?" he asked with a knowing smile. "Is it that obvious?" David replied, grateful for the assist. "Don't worry about it. We've all been there. The first week is always the worst. Just pace yourself or you'll burn out before lunch." The guy's name was Tyler, and he'd been working there for 3 years while going to school. As they worked, Tyler filled David in on the unwritten rules of the store: which managers to avoid, which customers were trouble, how to look busy when there was nothing to do because standing still would get you yelled at. David listened carefully, filing away every detail. This was exactly what he needed to hear, the real story behind the metrics and reports. By the time his first break rolled around, David was exhausted in a way he hadn't been in years. His muscles screamed, his feet hurt, and he still had 6 hours left in his shift. He clocked out and headed toward the employee break room, desperate for a moment to sit down. The break room was small and depressing. Flickering fluorescent lights, mismatched chairs, a vending machine that looked like it hadn't been serviced in months, and a microwave that was probably older than some of the employees. This was where his workers were supposed to relax and recharge. David grabbed a bottle of water from his lunch bag and collapsed into one of the plastic chairs. Around him, other employees sat in small groups or alone, most of them staring at their phones, too tired to even talk. The atmosphere was heavy, defeated. He'd only been here for 4 hours, and he already understood something important. This wasn't about lazy employees or entitled workers. This was about a system that ground people down, day after day, until they had nothing left to give, and he was responsible for creating it. As David sat there, letting that realization sink in, he heard something that made him look up. Someone was crying, soft, muffled sobs coming from the corner of the room near the vending machines. He turned and saw a young woman sitting alone, her shoulders shaking, her face hidden behind her hands. Her Retail Max vest was still on. Her name tag said she was new, and she was falling apart in a break room while the world kept spinning around her. David knew he should probably introduce himself, say something comforting. But for a moment he just sat there, watching the stranger cry, and wondered how many other people in his stores felt exactly the same way. How many were one bad shift away from breaking down? How many had already quit, taking their stories with them? He was about to find out. David stood up slowly, his tired muscles protesting. He could have ignored the crying girl. Plenty of other people in the break room were doing exactly that, either genuinely not noticing or pretending they didn't. In the corporate world, you learn to mind your own business. But something about the sound of those muffled sobs got to him. Maybe it was because he was already feeling raw from his first few hours on the job, or maybe it was because he knew deep down that this was exactly why he'd come here. He walked over carefully, not wanting to startle her. Up close he could see she was young, probably early 20s. Her name tag read Lily, new hire, and it looked almost comically oversized on her small frame. Her hands were shaking as she gripped her phone, and her breathing was uneven, like she was trying hard to pull herself together but couldn't quite manage it. "Hey," David said softly, standing a respectful distance away. "You okay?" It was a stupid question. Obviously she wasn't okay. But what else do you say to a stranger who's falling apart? Lily looked up, her eyes red and swollen. For a second she seemed like she might tell him to leave her alone, but then something in her face crumbled and the words just started pouring out. "I'm sorry, I can't. I messed up really bad and I don't know what to do." David pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "What happened?" "This is only my 3rd week here," Lily said, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "My first real job, you know. I dropped out of college last semester because I couldn't afford it anymore, and I've been trying so hard to do everything right here. But today I made this huge mistake at the register, and now I'm probably going to get fired." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she had to take a deep breath before continuing. "It was $300. The register showed a transaction went through, but then the money disappeared. Just gone. And my supervisor, he came over and started yelling at me right there in front of all these customers. He said I was careless, said I obviously didn't care about my job, said I was going to have to pay it back out of my paycheck." David felt his jaw tighten. $300 on a minimum wage paycheck? That could take weeks to pay back. Maybe longer. Did you figure out what went wrong? He asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. That's the thing, Lily said, leaning forward. I know exactly what happened. The register froze right in the middle of the transaction. It does that sometimes. It's done it twice before this week, but those times I caught it before the customer left. This time everything looked fine on the screen, so I gave the customer their bags and they walked out. Then 5 minutes later, the transaction just vanished, like it never happened. David's mind was already racing. Register system glitches. He'd heard about technical issues before, but they'd always been presented to him as minor inconveniences, nothing that couldn't be worked around. Nobody had ever mentioned that these glitches were costing employees money or their jobs. Did you tell your supervisor about the system freezing? He asked. Lily nodded, wiping at her eyes again. I told him the first time it happened, and I told Patricia, the store manager, too. They both said the same thing, that the registers are old and we just have to work with what we have. That corporate doesn't have budget for upgrades right now. They told me to be more careful, to always double-check before the customer leaves. She laughed, but there was no humor in it, just bitterness. But how am I supposed to know when the system's going to glitch? It looks completely normal, and then boom, the transaction's gone. And now I'm the one who has to pay for it. David sat back in his chair, feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. This was his fault. Not directly, maybe, but the decision to delay system upgrades, that had his signature all over it. He remembered the meeting where the IT department had proposed a complete overhaul of the point-of-sale systems. The cost had seemed astronomical at the time. He'd looked at the numbers, calculated the return on investment, and decided it could wait another year. Maybe 2. He'd never thought about what that decision meant for the people actually using those systems every day. Never considered that his cost-cutting was creating situations exactly like this one. That's not right, David said quietly. You shouldn't have to pay for a system failure. Yeah, well, try telling that to my supervisor, Lily said. He doesn't care about excuses. He just cares about his numbers. She pulled her phone closer and David could see she'd been looking at her bank account. The balance was painfully low. The worst part is I actually need this job, Lily continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. My mom died 6 months ago. Cancer. And now it's just me and my little brother. He's 16, still in high school. I'm all he's got. This job was supposed to be our fresh start, you know? The benefits, the steady paycheck, everything. I really believed it would work out. David felt something twist in his chest. Here was a kid, barely more than a kid herself, trying to hold her family together with a minimum wage job and a company that was failing her at every turn. I'm not even crying because I'm scared of losing the job, Lily said, and now she was looking right at him. Her eyes were still wet, but there was something else there now. Anger, maybe, or disappointment. I'm crying because I actually believed this place was different. You know those training videos we had to watch? All that stuff about company values and treating employees like family? I actually bought into that. I thought I'd found somewhere that cared about people like me. She shook her head, looking away. But it's all just words, isn't it? None of it means anything. The second something goes wrong, they're ready to throw you away and blame you for problems you didn't even create. I'm just a number to them, a number they can replace tomorrow if they want to. The question hung in the air between them, and David didn't have an answer, at least not one he could give her right now. Because she was right. He could see that now. All those mission statements and value propositions he'd approved for the employee handbook, they were just words, pretty sentences designed to make the company look good, not actual principles they lived by. How much time do you have left on your break? David asked finally. Lily glanced at the clock on the wall. About 10 minutes. Take the whole thing, David said. Take longer if you need it. I'll cover for you if anyone asks. You'd do that? You don't even know me. Maybe not, David said, standing up. But I know what it's like to feel like the system's rigged against you. Just take your time, okay? Things are going to work out. He said it with more confidence than he felt, but he meant it. Somehow he was going to make sure the situation got fixed. Not just for Lily, but for everyone else dealing with the same broken systems and impossible situations. Lily looked at him like she wanted to believe him, but couldn't quite manage it. Thanks, she said softly. I don't even know your name. Mark, David said, tapping his name tag. I'm new too. Well, Mark, welcome to Retail Max, Lily said with a weak smile. Hope you last longer than I will. David walked back to the stockroom, but his mind was miles away. He'd been here less than a day and he'd already found more problems than months of reports had revealed. How many other employees were out there right now, dealing with faulty equipment, impossible expectations, and supervisors who cared more about numbers than people? He had 3 more days left in this store. 3 days to see how deep the problems really went, and something told him that what he'd just witnessed in the break room was only the beginning. The boxes waiting for him seemed heavier now, loaded with more than just products. They carried the weight of decisions he'd made from the comfort of his office, decisions that rippled down to affect real people in ways he'd never imagined. Every outdated piece of equipment, every cost-cutting measure, every delayed upgrade, they all had consequences. Human consequences. And for the first time in a long time, David Richardson felt the full weight of what it meant to be responsible for 200 stores and thousands of employees. It was crushing, but it was also clarifying. Something had to change, and it had to start with him. David spent the rest of that first day watching everything with new eyes. Every interaction, every process, every small frustration that employees dealt with, he noted it all. By the time his shift ended, his feet were killing him and his back felt like it might never straighten out again. But more than the physical exhaustion, he was mentally drained from what he'd witnessed. The next morning, he arrived early and volunteered to help with the opening routine. That's when he met more of the team and started to understand just how deep the problems ran. There was Kevin, a guy in his mid-30s who'd been with the company for 7 years. He worked in the produce section and David noticed he had a slight limp. "Old injury?" David asked while they were restocking the apple display. Kevin laughed, but it was a tired sound. "Nah, new injury. Well, 6 months old. Slipped on a wet floor in the back. Tore something in my knee. Worked through it, though. Couldn't afford to take time off." "Didn't you file a workers' comp claim?" "Sure did. Still waiting on approval. In the meantime, I'm paying for physical therapy out of pocket because I can't afford to let it get worse. But that's just how it is, right? Can't let the job see you weak." David watched Kevin favor his good leg as he lifted a crate of lettuce and felt another weight settle on his shoulders. Workers' comp claims that took 6 months. That wasn't right. That shouldn't be normal. During his lunch break on the second day, David sat with a group of employees in the break room. They'd started to accept him as one of them, just another worker grinding through shifts. People talked more freely around him now. A woman named Christine, who worked the deli counter, was complaining about the scheduling system. "I got my schedule for next week yesterday. You know how many hours they gave me?" 15. Last week I had 32. The week before that, 21. How am I supposed to pay my bills when I don't even know how much I'm going to make? "At least you got your schedule," another employee chimed in. "I found out about my Saturday shift when Patricia called me at 7 in the morning, asking where I was. Apparently it was posted on the board, but nobody told me to check." David listened as they traded stories about the scheduling chaos, shifts that changed at the last minute, being called in on days off, having to find their own coverage if they got sick. The picture that emerged was of a system designed for maximum flexibility for the company, with zero consideration for the humans trying to build lives around it. On the third day, David was assigned to shadow different departments. That's when he really got to see Lily's supervisor in action. His name was Brian, and he'd been with Retail Max for 5 years. On paper, he was one of their best performers. His department consistently hit sales targets, his inventory shrinkage was low, and his customer satisfaction scores were decent. But watching him work told a different story. David was stocking shelves nearby when he heard Brian's voice cutting through the store. "Are you kidding me right now? How hard is it to follow a simple instruction?" He turned to see Brian standing over a younger employee, a teenager who looked terrified. The kid had apparently stocked the wrong brand of cereal in the wrong spot. An honest mistake, an easy fix. But Brian was treating it like a federal crime. "This is exactly why we can't keep good people," Brian said loudly, making sure nearby customers could hear. "Nobody pays attention anymore. Nobody cares about doing quality work." The teenager mumbled an apology and quickly started fixing the mistake, his hands shaking. Brian stood there watching him, arms crossed, shaking his head like he was dealing with the world's biggest disappointment. David felt his anger rising, but forced himself to stay quiet. He was here to observe, not to interfere. Not yet. Later that afternoon, David watched Brian interact with Lily. She was at the register, carefully checking each transaction, clearly paranoid about another glitch. A line was forming, and Brian swooped in. "Move faster," he said, loud enough for the customers to hear. "You're holding everyone up. We don't have time for you to triple-check everything." "I'm just making sure the transaction goes through properly," Lily said quietly, not looking up. "The transaction is fine. You're being paranoid. Now speed it up or I'll put someone else on the register." Lily's hands moved faster, but David could see the stress on her face. She was caught in an impossible situation. Move too slow and get yelled at for holding up the line. Move too fast and risk another glitch that she'd have to pay for. That evening, David stayed late after his shift, wandering around the store as it was closing. He found Patricia in her office surrounded by papers and looking exhausted. "Hey, Mark," she said, glancing up. "What are you still doing here?" "Just wanted to ask you something," David said, leaning against the doorframe. "That register issue that happened with Lily, the one where the transaction disappeared, has that happened before?" Patricia's face tightened. "A few times. It's a known issue with the older system. We've reported it to IT multiple times." "And what did they say?" "That it's on the list for the next upgrade cycle. But that's been the answer for 2 years now." She rubbed her temples. "Look, I know it's not ideal, but we have to work with what we have. That's the reality. But making Lily pay for it out of her paycheck? That seems harsh." Patricia looked uncomfortable. "That's Brian's call. He's the department supervisor, and technically it was her transaction. She should have caught it. Even though it's a system glitch that she can't control. I don't make the rules, Mark. I just enforce them. If I don't, I get called into corporate and asked why my store isn't meeting standards. Everyone's got someone above them breathing down their neck." David left the office feeling like he'd been dunked in cold water. Patricia wasn't a villain. She was just another person trapped in a broken system, trying to survive. She was making bad decisions, sure, but they were decisions she felt she had to make to keep her own job. On his 4th day undercover, David started digging deeper. He took photos of equipment that was broken or outdated. He documented the schedule board showing the erratic hours employees were getting. He even timed how long it took to complete basic tasks with their current tools versus how long it should take with proper equipment. During breaks, he asked careful questions. What made a good day? What made a bad day? If they could change one thing about working here, what would it be? The answers were remarkably consistent. People didn't hate the work itself. They didn't even hate dealing with difficult customers. What wore them down was feeling like the company didn't care, like they were just replaceable parts in a machine. One older employee named Robert, who'd been with Retail Max for 12 years, put it best. "I've seen this place change a lot. Used to be management knew your name. They asked about your family. They actually noticed when you did good work. Now, we're just numbers on a spreadsheet. Hit your metrics or you're out. Nobody cares how you get there or what it costs you." That hit David hard because he realized Robert was describing the exact culture shift that had happened under his leadership. As the company grew, as he'd gotten further from the day-to-day operations, he'd started thinking in terms of numbers too. Efficiency metrics, profit margins, cost reduction. All important things for running a business, sure, but somewhere along the way the actual humans had gotten lost in the data. On his 5th day, David watched Brian pull Lily aside again. This time he was close enough to hear the whole conversation. "I'm writing you up," Brian said, holding a form. 3 mistakes this week. That's unacceptable." "What mistakes?" Lily asked, her voice shaking. "Monday, you were 2 minutes late from break. Wednesday, you forgot to offer a customer the loyalty card. Today, you had a customer complaint. That customer was upset because we were out of the product they wanted. That's not something I can control." "Should have handled it better. Should have offered alternatives. That's basic customer service." Brian thrust the write-up form at her. "Sign this. 3 write-ups and you're done. So I'd suggest you figure out real quick whether you actually want this job or not." David stood there, frozen, watching Lily sign the form with trembling hands. He wanted to step in so badly it physically hurt. Wanted to tear up that ridiculous write-up and tell Brian exactly what he thought of his management style. But he couldn't. Not yet. Because he needed to see the whole picture. Needed to understand every level of how this broken system worked before he could fix it. Interfering now might make him feel better, but it wouldn't solve the real problem. Still, watching Lily walk away, her shoulders hunched in defeat, David made himself a promise. This wasn't going to stand. Not for her. Not for anyone else working in his stores. The question was no longer whether things needed to change. It was how big those changes needed to be. That night, David sat in his hotel room with his laptop open, surrounded by notes he'd taken throughout the week. His body ached from 5 days of physical labor, but his mind was working overtime. Everything he'd witnessed, every conversation he'd had, every broken piece of equipment he'd documented, it all painted a picture that made him sick to his stomach. He pulled up the employee files from HR. Brian's record was exactly what he'd expected. 5 years with the company, promoted twice, consistently hit or exceeded sales targets, multiple performance bonuses. On paper, he looked like a model employee. A future district manager, maybe even regional. But David dug deeper. He looked at the turnover rate in Brian's department. It was nearly double the store average. He checked the anonymous employee feedback surveys that HR collected. Brian's name came up over and over. Creates hostile work environment. Plays favorites. Takes credit for others' work. Bullies new hires. So why was he still here? Why was he getting promoted? David found his answer in an email chain from 2 years ago. Patricia had flagged concerns about Brian's management style to the district manager. The response was brief and telling. His numbers are solid. Coach him on the soft skills, but don't rock the boat. We need strong performers. There it was. The company, David's company, had chosen to ignore a toxic manager because he hit his targets. And in doing so, they'd created an environment where good people were being chewed up and spit out. David closed his laptop and rubbed his eyes. He thought about his own role in all this. How many times had he looked at numbers without asking about the story behind them? How many times had he approved promotions based solely on performance metrics without considering what it took to achieve those numbers? The next morning, David arrived for what he'd decided would be his last day undercover. He had enough information, more than enough. Now he just needed to see one more thing. He found Tyler in the stockroom, organizing inventory, the young guy who'd helped him on his first day. They'd become friendly over the week, and David had learned that Tyler was working his way through college, studying business management. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Can I ask you something?" David said, grabbing a box cutter to help. "Why do you stay here? With everything that's wrong with this place, why not go somewhere else?" Tyler thought about it for a moment. "Honestly, because it's not all bad. The pay could be better, sure. The equipment sucks. And Brian's a nightmare. But some of the people here are great. Patricia's under a lot of pressure, but she tries to be fair. Kevin always has your back. And the customers, most of them anyway, they're decent." He paused, slicing open a box. "Plus, I keep hoping it'll get better. That someone upstairs will actually pay attention to what's happening down here. Probably stupid, right?" "No," David said quietly. "Not stupid at all." Around mid-morning, David was restocking the cereal aisle when he heard raised voices near the front registers. He walked over to find Brian standing in front of Lily's register, his face red with anger. A small crowd of customers had stopped to watch. "Are you serious right now?" Brian was saying. "Another transaction error? That's it. You're done." "It's not my fault," Lily said, and David could hear the desperation in her voice. "The system crashed again. Look at the screen." Brian didn't look. "I don't want to hear excuses. This is the 3rd time this week. You're clearly not cut out for this job." The register froze in the middle of the transaction. "It's the same problem from before." "I did everything right." "No, you didn't. If you'd done everything right, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Now step away from the register. You're suspended pending termination." David felt something snap inside him. He'd spent 5 days watching, documenting, staying silent. But this was too much. He started walking toward them, not entirely sure what he was going to say. just knowing he couldn't watch this happen. But before he got there, something unexpected happened. Kevin limped over from the produce section. "Hey, Brian. That register has been glitching all week. I saw it happen to 3 different cashiers yesterday alone. It's not her fault. Stay out of this, Kevin. This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does," Christine said, walking over from the deli. "We all use those registers. We've all had problems with them. You know that." Brian looked around, suddenly aware that other employees were gathering. "Everyone get back to work now." Nobody moved. Tyler appeared next to David. "The system's broken, Brian. We've been telling management for months. You can't keep blaming people for equipment failures." David watched in amazement as more employees stepped forward. People he'd worked with all week. People who were tired of staying silent. They weren't yelling or being confrontational. They were just stating facts, backing each other up, refusing to let Lily be thrown under the bus for something beyond her control. Patricia emerged from her office, taking in the scene. "What's going on here?" "Brian's trying to fire Lily for a system error," Kevin said. "We're telling him that's not right." Patricia looked at Brian, then at the gathered employees, then at the register screen, which was indeed frozen on an error message. David could see the conflict on her face. She was caught between backing her supervisor and acknowledging what everyone knew was true. "Brian in my office. Now," she said finally. Then to Lily, "Take your break. We'll sort this out." The crowd dispersed slowly, employees returning to their stations. But something had shifted. David could feel it. These people had found their voice, even if just for a moment. He caught up with Lily near the break room. She was shaking, adrenaline and fear mixing together. "That was brave," David said, standing up to him like that. "I didn't really have a choice," Lily said. "I can't afford to lose this job, but I also can't keep taking the blame for things I didn't do. I guess I just hit my limit. You know what the crazy thing is?" she continued. "I still believe this company could be good. Like the actual idea of it. Taking care of customers, providing jobs, being part of the community. That stuff matters. But somewhere along the way, the people running things forgot that it only works if you take care of the employees too." David nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Here was this young woman who'd been knocked down over and over this week, and she still had hope. Still believed things could be better. That took a kind of strength he wasn't sure he possessed. "I should probably start looking for another job," Lily said quietly. "Even if Patricia doesn't fire me today, Brian's going to make my life miserable until I quit." "That's how it works." "Maybe not," David said. "Maybe things are about to change." Lily gave him a sad smile. "You're sweet, Mark, but things don't change. Not really. Not for people like us." David went back to the stockroom, pulled out his phone and sent a text to his head of HR. "Need you to arrange something for Monday morning. Cleveland store. All hands meeting. I'll explain later." Then he sent another message to his executive assistant. "Clear my schedule for Monday, and get me a suit delivered to the Cleveland Marriott. Something approachable, not intimidating." His undercover week was over. He'd seen enough, learned enough. Now it was time to do something about it. That afternoon, David worked his last shift as Mark the trainee. He helped Kevin with produce, even though his back screamed in protest. He chatted with Christine at the deli about her kids. He made sure to thank Tyler for being welcoming on his first day, and he watched Brian from a distance, memorizing every dismissive gesture, every condescending comment, every small cruelty that the man inflicted without even seeming to notice. When his shift ended, David clocked out for the last time. He stood in the parking lot for a moment, looking at the store. From the outside, it looked like any other Retail Max location. Clean, professional, successful. But he knew the truth now. Knew what was happening behind those walls. The struggles, the frustrations, the quiet desperation of people just trying to make a living and being ground down by systems that didn't care. He thought about his conversation with Lily, about her belief that the company could be good if it just remembered to take care of its people. She was right. The foundation was there. The potential existed, but potential meant nothing without action. David got in his borrowed Honda and drove back to his hotel. Tomorrow was Sunday. He'd rest, prepare, and get his thoughts in order. And then on Monday, Mark the trainee would disappear, and David Richardson would walk back into that store. But this time, everyone would know exactly who he was. The question that kept him up that night wasn't whether he could fix things. He had the power to do that. The question was whether he had the courage to fix them properly. To make real changes, not just cosmetic ones. To put people ahead of profit margins, at least enough that his employees could do their jobs without feeling like the system was designed to break them. He thought about Lily crying in the break room, about Kevin working on a damaged knee, about Tyler hoping someone would pay attention, about all the voices that had been ignored for too long. Yeah, he decided. He had the courage, or at least he was going to find it, because come Monday morning everything was going to change. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and a chill in the air. David stood in his hotel room adjusting his tie in the mirror. The suit his assistant had delivered was perfect, professional but not overly formal. He wanted to look like a CEO but an accessible one, someone who actually cared about what happened in his stores. His hands were shaking slightly as he buttoned his jacket. In 15 years of running Retail Max, he'd given hundreds of presentations, faced countless difficult situations, negotiated deals worth millions. But this felt different, more personal, more important. He arrived at the store at 8 in the morning, an hour before opening. His head of HR, Jennifer, was already there, along with 2 members from his executive team. Patricia stood near the front entrance, looking confused and more than a little nervous. When Jennifer had called her yesterday to arrange the all-staff meeting, she'd been told only that corporate leadership needed to address the team. "Nothing more, Mr. Richardson," Patricia said, her voice tight. "I didn't realize you'd be here personally. If I'd known, I would have prepared something, made sure everything was perfect. Patricia, I need you to gather all the staff in the break room, everyone who's working today. This won't take long, but it's important." She nodded and hurried off, clearly panicking about what this might mean. David felt a pang of guilt. She wasn't the enemy here. She was just another person caught in a broken system, trying her best with impossible circumstances. 10 minutes later, the break room was packed. Employees crowded in, some standing against the walls, others sitting in the mismatched chairs. David saw familiar faces. Kevin with his limp, Christine from the deli, Tyler looking curious, and there near the back was Lily, her arms crossed protectively across her chest, looking like she was bracing for bad news. Brian stood near the front, his posture confident, clearly thinking this meeting was about recognizing high performers. He had no idea what was coming. David walked to the front of the room and the conversations died down. He looked at the faces staring back at him, some curious, some worried, all of them tired. These were his employees, his responsibility, and he'd failed them. "Good morning," he started, his voice carrying clearly. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is David Richardson. I'm the CEO of Retail Max." He paused, watching the recognition dawn on faces throughout the room. Tyler's eyes went wide, Christine's mouth dropped open, and Lily, she just stared at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "But some of you do know me," David continued. "You know me as Mark, the trainee who's been working here for the past week." The room erupted. People started talking over each other, looking at their neighbors in shock. Patricia's face had gone completely white. And Brian looked like he'd just swallowed something very unpleasant. David held up his hand, waiting for quiet. "I came here undercover because I needed to see what was really happening in my stores. The reports I was getting didn't match up with what employees were saying anonymously, so I decided to find out for myself." He pulled out his phone where he'd compiled his notes and photos, and what I found was unacceptable. I found equipment that hasn't been updated in years, causing problems that you all have to deal with. I found scheduling systems that make it impossible for you to plan your lives. I found safety issues being ignored because workers' comp claims take too long to process. I found good people being blamed for system failures that are completely out of their control. David's eyes found Lily in the crowd. I watched a young woman break down in this very room because she was being held responsible for a $300 register error that was caused by equipment we should have replaced years ago. Equipment that I chose not to replace because I was looking at spreadsheets instead of seeing the real people those decisions affected. Lily's eyes were filling with tears, but she didn't look away. "I also watched something incredible happen on Friday," David continued. "I watched employees stand up for each other. I watched people risk their own jobs to defend a coworker who was being treated unfairly. And that told me something important. The problem isn't the people working in this store. The problem is the system I created that makes it so hard for you to do your jobs well. He turned to face Brian directly. Brian, you're terminated, effective immediately. You'll receive your final paycheck and benefits information from HR. You're free to leave now. Brian's confident posture crumbled. What, you can't just fire me? I hit all my targets. My numbers are some of the best in the district. Your numbers are good, David agreed, but they came at the cost of creating a toxic workplace. You bullied new employees. You took credit for other people's work. You ignored legitimate problems and blamed the people reporting them. That's not the kind of leadership this company needs. Jennifer stepped forward, gesturing for Brian to follow her. He looked around the room, maybe hoping someone would defend him, but nobody spoke. He left and the room felt lighter for it. David turned back to the assembled employees. Here's what's going to happen. Effective immediately, this store is getting a complete technology upgrade. New registers, new inventory systems, new time clocks that actually work. I'm also launching a company-wide review of our scheduling practices. You shouldn't have to live week to week not knowing when or how much you'll work. He pulled out an envelope and walked toward Lily. The crowd parted to let him through. Up close, he could see she'd been crying, but there was something else in her eyes now. Hope, maybe. Lily, you were charged $300 for a system failure that wasn't your fault. Here's a check for that amount, plus a bonus for the stress this company put you through. He handed her the envelope. I'm also offering you a position at our corporate office. We're creating an employee advocacy program, and I need people who understand what it's really like to work on the front lines. People who aren't afraid to speak truth to power. Interested? Lily took the envelope with shaking hands. I don't understand. Why me? Because you asked me a question in this break room last week. You asked if all our talk about company values was just words. And you were right to ask. It was just words. But I want to change that. I want to make those values real. And I can't do that sitting in my office 20 floors up. I need voices like yours helping me see what I'm missing. Can I think about it? Lily asked quietly. Take all the time you need. The offer stands whenever you're ready. David addressed the room again. I'm also establishing a direct communication line from stores to corporate. Not through district managers, not through regional directors. Directly to my office. If you see problems, I want to hear about them. If you have ideas for improvements, I want to know. Your experience matters, and it's time I started treating it that way. Patricia raised her hand tentatively. Sir, what about my position? Am I being replaced too? No, David said firmly. You're not the problem, Patricia. You're understaffed, undersupported, and dealing with impossible expectations. That changes now. You'll be getting an assistant manager and enough staff to actually run this store properly. But I am going to ask you to do something for me. What's that? Help me figure out what other stores need. You know this business from the ground level. Help me make sure the changes we implement actually work for the people doing the job. Patricia nodded, looking stunned and relieved in equal measure. David spent the next hour answering questions, taking notes, and listening to concerns he'd never heard when visiting stores as CEO. People told him about broken equipment in the back room, about the water fountain that hadn't worked in 6 months, about the lack of proper break areas, about customers who were abusive and how they had no support dealing with them. He documented everything. This one store wasn't unique, he knew that now. These problems existed across his company, but fixing them here would be the model for fixing them everywhere. As the meeting broke up and employees headed to their stations to open the store, Tyler pulled David aside. That was pretty incredible, but can I ask you something? Of course. How do we know this isn't just temporary? That once you leave, things won't go back to how they were? It was a fair question. The kind of question David himself would have asked. You don't know, he admitted. Not for certain. But I'm going to do everything I can to make sure these changes stick. And more than that, I'm going to keep coming back. Not undercover, just regular visits. I want to see how things are working. I want to hear directly from you all. Hold me accountable. Tyler nodded slowly. All right. I hope you mean that. I do. David found Lily restocking shelves, the envelope still clutched in her hand. You okay? He asked. I think so, she said. It's just a lot to process. Last week I thought I was about to lose everything. Now you're offering me a job at corporate? Only if you want it. You can stay here if you prefer. Either way, you won't be penalized for system errors anymore. Nobody will. Can I ask you something? Lily said. That day in the break room when I was crying and you came over, did you already know who I was? Was that whole conversation just you gathering information? David thought about lying, about making himself look better. But she deserved the truth. I knew there was a problem. But I didn't know your specific situation until you told me. And when you asked if our company values were just words, that question hit me harder than you know. Because you were right. They were just words. And seeing that, really seeing it, changed everything. Lily was quiet for a moment. I'll think about your offer. I promise. But right now I just want to get through my shift without worrying about getting fired. Fair enough. 6 months later, David stood in the same store, watching it operate with new systems, proper staffing, and a culture that was slowly but surely changing. The transformation hadn't been easy. Some executives had pushed back on the costs. Some managers had resisted the new accountability measures. But David had held firm. Lily had eventually accepted the corporate position, and she was currently helping roll out the employee advocacy program to stores across the country. Kevin's workers' comp claim had been approved, and he'd gotten the surgery he needed. Tyler was finishing his degree with a new scholarship program David had, established for hourly employees. The company's stock had taken a small hit when investors heard about the increased labor costs, but employee retention was up 40%. Customer satisfaction scores had climbed steadily, and for the first time in years, David felt like he was building something sustainable, something real. He kept a photo on his desk now, not of awards or achievements, but of the Cleveland store break room, that depressing little space where Lily had asked him a question that changed everything. It reminded him every day why he'd gone undercover, why he'd made the changes he did, and why he could never afford to get comfortable again. Because at the end of the day, companies weren't just numbers and profit margins. They were people. People with families, dreams, struggles, and hopes. And if he couldn't remember that, then all the success in the world wouldn't mean a thing.